Welcome to One Move at a Time, the show where we highlight people and organizations that are advancing our U.S. chess mission statement to empower people, enrich lives, and enhance communities through chess. I'm Dan Lucas, the Senior Director of Strategic Communication at U.S. Chess, and my guest today is Howard Burton from Ideas Roadshow, an award-winning multimedia initiative dedicated to harnessing the benefits of modern technology to explore ideas through the arts and sciences through thoughtful and seriously entertaining documentary films, books, and podcasts. Howard has created a 4-part documentary called Through the Mirror of Chess, a cultural exploration, as well as a companion book, Chessays. The films provide a comprehensive investigation into the remarkable significance of chess across a wide range of times and places, touching on cultural history, the nature of competitiveness, artificial intelligence, chess variants, art, literature, psychology, education, and much more, in an attempt to comprehensively address the question of what makes our game so unique. Howard Burton is an independent filmmaker and author of 5 other books in addition to Chessays. He holds a PhD in physics and an MA in philosophy, and was the founding executive director of Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics from 1999 to 2007. He lives in France. Visit howardburton.com for more information about him. Howard Burton, welcome to One Move at a Time.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So let's start at the beginning with this. And what is your personal history with the game of chess?
Well, as I wrote in the introduction to the book, it's something. Chess is a game which has fascinated me for a long time, certainly because of its beauty and because of its seeming uniqueness. For a long time, I thought to myself, this game seems so remarkable and different than other games, and that raises one's curiosity. What is it about this that makes it so special? And then as I got a little bit older, I started to get a sense of the history and the cultural impact, which also seemed staggeringly large to me. I've played chess my whole life, but not very intensely, and certainly not very competitively. I had a few moments where I dipped in, as I detailed, but by and large, it's not something that I've played super competitively. I was much more on my interests were much more on the following other people's games, doing puzzles, doing those sorts of things, problems, I guess you'd say. And so I've been interested in lots of games, but chess is certainly something which has captivated me from its uniqueness. And then there was another part of it, of the experience, that I didn't mention actually in the book, but when I was a graduate student, years, when dinosaurs were roaming the earth and all that kind of stuff. I remember reading somewhere that chess was being used as a tool for inner city youth to get people motivated and get them interested and so forth. I think it was the New York Times or something. Anyway, it was a long time ago. And I had a friend of mine who was running a program for particularly troubled teens in Toronto, which is where I was at the time. And I asked him if it would be possible for me to just, because I was fascinated by this. So I thought, well, maybe this is true. And so would it be possible for me to come and work with you in your school for a while and do something with chess with these guys? And he said, sure. And so I did that for a year or two. And it really was remarkable. These were kids that really had no interest in anything, basically. And they really had been beaten down by life. They were really in difficult circumstances. And some of them, I mean, not all of them, obviously, but some of them really grabbed onto the game in a way that I thought was noteworthy. So that stuck with me as well in terms of the social impact. It wasn't something, I didn't go off and become a teacher, and it's not like I've dedicated years of my life or anything like that to that, but it certainly resonated with me. It stuck with me in terms of the social impact. So then when it came time to doing the films, I was perhaps a little bit more sensitive to the potential social impact of chess than I otherwise might have been. So that's a long-winded, roundabout answer to your question, I think.
And I'm curious about then what the professional interest was for creating this almost 4 hours worth of video about the game of chess. So let's take a step back and talk about what Ideas Roadshow is, how long it's been around, and why ultimately you felt that chess would be such a good fit for the show.
Yeah, good question. So as you mentioned in your gracious introduction, I've done a couple of different things. So I built and ran a physics institute for a while, and I have an academic background in physics. That's a weird sort of story anyway. But and then after that, I moved to France, as you mentioned, and I started this initiative called Ideas Roadshow. And this is a little bit over a decade ago, roughly a decade ago. And the idea was that there were all these great insights from the world of research that aren't getting out to the general public in a way that can be interesting and captivating and accessible to them, and also tell some of the real stories. So during those first few years in Ideas Roadshow, that's what we were doing. That, and hence the name. It was a roadshow. So I went around with digital media technology with a few cameras and went and talked to these people and tried to bottle that and use the conversational format to, and then future editing to really highlight their ideas in a way that wouldn't be hackneyed, it wouldn't be the same sort of story, and use conversations to probe, well, what were you interested in? What frustrated you when this happened? What did you think about that? And so forth and so on. So that's what I was doing to try to make these things accessible, using a lot of conversations. Then we moved from that to a more overtly educational platform. And then eventually, after having learned a lot of these digital media skills, I thought to myself, well, what I would really like to do is now that I've somehow become sort of a filmmaker, is to cross that bridge and actually make films, because now I know how to do that, and tell interesting stories that combine both things that are research oriented, things that are socially relevant, things that are interesting in the arts and sciences and so forth and so on. And chess was an obvious thing to consider because of its enormously broad cultural impact. And so I had, in fact, I had thought about doing a big series on chess back in 2020, and in fact had even got filming arranged for early March, I think it was, in the UK in 2020. And then, well, I don't have to tell you what happened. And that sort of set me back. And in fact, we made a lateral move towards making a film about the pandemic and did other stuff. But then after that was done, I thought, well, it would really be interesting to go back and do the chess thing. And I had always been thinking about it, and my thoughts were evolving, and I was learning and reading a lot more about not only the history and the culture of chess, but the contemporary world of chess, what was actually happening. And the more I read and the more I saw, the more there was. And it became more and more interesting to try to wrap my head around it and tell a story that would be captivating to people from all sorts of different levels. People who are interested in chess, people who are themselves, of course, chess players, people who are not particularly interested in chess, but fascinated by games, fascinated by art, fascinated by different aspects of literature, what motivates people and so forth. And the more time that I had, I guess, because of the pandemic and other things, I was able to ruminate on this, and more strands of the story started coming together. And so it was a particularly interesting journey for me, and hopefully it will be interesting for people who watch it.
And I would like to start showing some clips from the show, but before we do, I'm going to kind of interweave questions about both the book and the documentary as we go through this show. I described Chessays as a companion book to the documentary, but maybe that's not accurate. Do you see it as a companion book, or more of a supplemental material, or something that just completely stands on its own?
I see it as the greatest work of literature ever produced. So I didn't start off thinking that I would write a book of essays. It's almost like a disease for me. I seem to always find myself, I seem to often find myself with opinions. I mean, one of the things that's, I think, perhaps a little bit unique about my situation is that I'm very often flirting with this insider-outsider status. So, and chess is a good example, but there are lots of other examples. I've written a book about how Americans should get their act together, and I'm in this interesting, I think, perspective because I come from North America. I'm Canadian. I'm very, very familiar with the American way of life. I took a lot of time to learn about the U.S. Constitution and all the rest of these different types of things. My sense is that it's useful. It can be very useful for somebody who's willing to do the work and willing to understand a particular community, but nonetheless is somewhat objective and is on the outside to be able to come in and offer some sense of their particular perspective. I did that again with a book on the pandemic, and with Chessays, it was the similar sort of thing. So I started off just thinking this would be a wonderful filmic project. There's so much there, and the more I saw there was there. But then as I plunged into the chess world to do more and more research and started really understanding not only the history, but also, as I say, contemporary activities and what was happening and so forth and so on, as inevitably happens, I began to get personal opinions. And by and large, that's not my orientation through making films. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. It's just not what I'm most of the time really interested in doing. It's not sort of a Michael Moore type of, it should be this, or, don't eat French fries all day long, or, who started the war in Iraq, or I think this regime is corrupt, or anything like that. I think that's wonderful in a free society. You should have people doing that with films. It's just not the sort of thing that I'm particularly interested in doing. So my motivation for making films is much more contextual. I want to provide a deeper context. I want to make connections. I want to give as close to objectively, truly as I can, the backdrop to what actually happened, because I think that's fascinating. With essays, on the other hand, it's quite different. I feel that personally, if you're going to read some essays, you want to hear somebody's opinions, whether you agree or disagree. You want something a little bit more provocative. You want that to come across. And so the more research I did, the more opinions I started to get. And it reached a point where I thought, well, I should really write these things down. Again, that's the sort of disease part. So I did. And that was interesting too. And it helped refine some of my ideas, of course. But in that sense, so yes, it's a companion piece. To answer your question, eventually, you have to wait sometimes for me to get to the point. But it's a companion piece insofar as obviously it was part of the whole project. But it wasn't as if I started off saying, and I'm going to write a whole bunch of essays. It was the more I started thinking about it, the more I realized I actually had some things to say based upon this sort of inside-outside, objective, maybe subjective perspective. And essays would be a good way of conveying that. And hopefully that too would be interesting to people, both, again, on the inside of the chess world and the outside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so let's take a look at a piece of video from part one. I'm going to share your segment about a little bit about Hollywood chess, and especially about misoriented boards. And the reason I'm doing this is personal fun. My friends on Facebook know me as the guy who's driven to distraction by how often boards are misoriented on Hollywood's various productions. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about this after we take a look at the video. So let me pull this up.
On the white square and black queen on the black square. And the board must be oriented so that the square facing the extreme left-hand side of each player is dark, while the one furthest to the right is white. Well, you might have known that too, but if so, that would make you relatively unique by Hollywood standards. Because even the most casual of chess players will tell you that whenever they see a chess scene in a film or on TV, there's an odds-on chance that the initial setup of the board and pieces will be backwards. Roughly the chess equivalent of slam dunking a volleyball.
So having looked at all those misoriented boards from Hollywood, do you have any guess, Howard, about why it feels like something that should only be 50% wrong is wrong what seems to be 60 or 70%? I have a personal little pet hypothesis on this, but I'm curious to hear yours.
I assumed that it was 50% wrong, but so I don't have any. I mean, I don't know the space of chess scenes in Hollywood. So my just instinctive assumption was that they were wrong half the time because they just, because that's just the law of averages. But I'd love to hear your views if you think they're slightly more than 50%.
And I completely admit that this may just simply be confirmation bias on my part, but it definitely feels in my heart like it's 60 to 70%. And my thought is that because most people are right-handed, that they instinctually put the darker, heavier square down to their right side. That it's a subconscious little thing that's happening.
Yeah, well, you could well be right. I have no idea. I don't even have an opinion on that. So that's groundbreaking news right there.
I don't know that anyone has ever called that silly little theory groundbreaking before, but thank you. So that's kind of the softer cultural aspect of chess that you discuss in your documentary. It was also fascinating to me because I've seen many documentaries about chess that are especially focused or geared towards the mainstream public. And yours has more heavy chess in it, chess moves, chess analysis than any other doc I've seen. Did anybody try to dissuade you from that? Or did you say there's just no way I can do this without showing puzzles and even some full games like the opera game?
So the short answer is nobody tried to dissuade me, but then I tend not to talk to people about things that I'm doing. So I'm sure had I told people that I was going to do this, lots of people would have tried to dissuade me. But yes, I did that quite a lot. And there were a couple of reasons why I did that deliberately. And so there are all sorts of games, and there are even references, if you look closely with things, almost everything there. I mean, there's Kasparov's Immortal, there's, as you say, there's the opera game, there's the game of the century. There are clips from lots and lots and lots and lots of games. And I did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I wanted the films to work on two different levels. I wanted them to work on a level where somebody who's familiar with chess and really into chess could get something out of it and find it interesting or gratifying for them, and not being in a situation where they're watching a film and here's the way the bishop moves and here's, this kind of thing. So I wanted them to be able to see something that might be interesting and captivating for them. But also, it reminds me of, as you said, and as we talked about, I have a mathematics background. And one of the things that always drives me crazy is that people talk about things like, well, there's the beauty of mathematics and the creativity of mathematics, and isn't it a wonderful thing? And if you're somebody who's had an experience in higher mathematics, you know exactly what they're talking about. But if you're not one of those people, you have no idea what these people are talking about. And you think they're all crazy because your only experience of mathematics is you're sitting there in, whatever, Mrs. Hodgson's homeroom class or whatever, and you're reiterating some mindless rote formula that you neither know nor care about. And your life experience has been completely different from what these people are telling you. And there's a bridge that has to be crossed. And I don't think that's terribly difficult to do. Sometimes it's hard to do, but not always. And I think the same sort of thing is true with chess. So I really wanted, rather than just say, and there's beauty and there's artistry and there's creativity in chess, the standard sort of tropes where if you're not a chess player, you think, okay, yeah. It's the same sort of thing as somebody saying, and mathematics can be creative. And you kind of look at them and go, okay, well, whatever turns your crank. I wanted to go a little bit more than that. I wanted to try to show people tangibly what sorts of things, give them a glimmer of what would be interesting to them, what would be captivating to them, so that they could get some sense of why people are so interested in the beauty of chess and the artistry of chess. I wanted them to see concretely, and I wanted them to see not only that in terms of the artistry for its own sake, but how that also has a cultural link. So for example, this idea of the pieces not only having their own values, but the shifting values and the interrelationship between the pieces, that's part of what makes the beauty of the game. But it's also what makes someone like de Saussure later on turn to chess as a natural metaphor for language, because he notices the same sorts of interrelations and the same sorts of dynamic that is responsible for his particular theory of language. So it's makes it more interesting because it's more substantial, and you get a real insight into not only why people are so interested in chess, but also the beauty that may or may not be manifested in all sorts of other cultural activities that are aligned with chess.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective for why you included that. So thank you. Another aspect of this, Doc, that was interesting to me, as someone who's spent my life in chess and has made a living in chess for almost 2 decades now, is how when someone takes a fresh look at a subject you think you know a lot about, that you can still find yourself learning something new. And so I want to show a clip now about the variants, from the variants section from part 1 of the documentary.
A game which explicitly involves the interaction of different types of pieces is particularly prone to reflecting cultural distinctiveness. For games with identical pieces that all move in the same basic way, it's fairly unlikely that play would vary substantially over time and place. You either play them or you don't. But once you're dealing with a collection of different pieces with distinct movements, it's easy to imagine that people will start suggesting that they be slightly adjusted to more strongly resonate with their local interests and values, eventually changing the very nature of the game itself, which has certainly been the case for chess. The game has witnessed hundreds of major and minor variations over its long history. Indeed, if there's one common feature throughout the history of chess, it's that it's constantly changing, a point all too often ignored by those who are keen to minimize its inherent diversity and regard the chess landscape as consisting of one true game and a large number of so-called variants.
And so, Howard, having looked at that clip, what was shocking to me was how many variants you were able to list. If someone had come off the street and asked me, how many chess variants are there, I would have said, oh, well, there's 2 or 3 that have really taken hold, like Bughouse, Blitz, Chess 960, and then there's maybe a dozen or so others. Well, that clip puts the light to that comment. Was it surprising at all to you how many variants you were able to come up with?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was surprising. It's even more than that. I mean, when I started a couple of years ago, I didn't know anything about. I'd never heard of shogi or shangxi or let alone all the different types of chess variants over the centuries. It's more standard chess, but all the different chess-like games. I knew nothing about those things, and in fact, I told you when I was younger and I was fascinated by chess, one of the things that stood out to me was its uniqueness. Here was this remarkable game that seemed like it was this sort of, mountain, like a Mount Fuji, right? It just sort of came out of nowhere, and there was nothing else that even remotely was comparable or came close. And that's just wrong. And as I've learned in lots of ways, it's wrong in the sense that there are lots of other chess-like games that are out there, and it's wrong in the sense that chess itself is something which has been developing and changing and having all sorts of different perspectives, different variants, different rules, different extra pieces, different this, different that. And that's part of the history of the game. And I didn't know the history of the game. And so that was really surprising to learn. But once you start digging in, I mean, once you pick up Murray, it's kind of obvious. He starts out right at the beginning and he starts talking about that. And it's interesting both for the game's sake, because there's sort of a double-edged sword is maybe not the right metaphor, but what's interesting is that on the one hand, as I point out, one of the things which is really inextricably linked to what chess is the fact that it changes, and it has changed over the centuries. But on the other hand, standard chess, standard international chess is different from all of these other games. There's no question about it, in terms of what it represents, in terms of its international recognizability, in terms of its sort of universal power that it has. So on the one hand, you have something which, as part of its DNA, is its variability, is its diversity, is its dynamism. And on the other hand, you have something which is at the same time this incredibly unique thing, which is internationally recognized everywhere. And so that tension is interesting, I think. And yeah, so maybe I'll just stop there.
Yeah. And so variants are a little bit of the softer area, and definitely Hollywood chess is a softer area. And one of the things that we struggle with here at US Chess is, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about the benefits of the game, but not a lot of hard research. But you show in this next clip I'm gonna show a study from this is from part 4 of the documentary, and it shows some research with some Bangladeshi school children who are randomly assigned to either learn chess or not learn chess, and one of the some of the conclusions that the researchers drew. So let me pull up this clip.
Benefits of chess are: the setting for this particular study was in rural Bangladesh, and the advantage of having the setting in a rural country is that the children that we are studying here almost surely have had no exposure to chess as a game. We use what is known as a randomized trial, which means that we randomly chose to assign some kids to receive chess lessons and some other kids to not receive chess lessons. And the idea here is that by comparing their outcomes over time, we will be able to say something quite definitive about the causal effect of receiving chess lessons. And we found that the kids who took the chess training became less risk averse. They were more willing to take some sort of risk. And that's because I think we understand that chess has the ability to conceptualize this notion of risk very well. For example, beginners often start by moving the queen out very early to go for an early checkmate. And that's because the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. But the chess coaches quickly taught these kids that going for the 4-move checkmate all the time is a really bad idea.
So what was interesting to me in what he concluded was, because we often describe in our world here that the most common way that chess affects students is in learning that their actions have consequences. But the researchers framed it kind of in a different way. And it was that the kids that learned chess were less risk averse. Did you have any particular thoughts on this study?
Yeah, well, let me back up a little bit and say that, let me address a couple of the points that you've made. First of all, the relative paucity of such studies. I was looking, and again, this is the advantage of, being somebody who has time on his hands and is interested in trying to get a global perspective and access to the internet. And so you think, okay, well, people are always talking about the impact of chess in the educational world. Where are the studies? So let's do some research. Well, there really aren't very many. And the ones that do exist are by and large, what's the word? Crap. So there are very, very few studies that are really scientific, rigorous, substantive, and so forth. And this was one of them by this gentleman, Wang Shengli, who's a wonderful fellow, by the way. And so that's yes to that first point. Then when you turn to the conclusion, I had exactly the same reaction that you did. My thought was the one thing that I would have imagined somebody who learns chess becoming is perhaps a little bit more conservative, not rash to judgment, not to jump into a situation, to be able to be a little bit more deliberative. And that to me is not synonymous with being less risk averse. And in fact, it's synonymous with being more risk averse. But I think when you start understanding, I mean, after all, Wang Sheng is an economist, and what he's saying, I think, is rather than looking at it in terms of risk averse, I think the better way to do it, which is why I subtitled that clip, comprehending risk. I think his point was, if I could paraphrase as best as I can understand it, maybe this is wrong, you should talk to him, but my sense is that there's a deeper understanding of risk. There's a deeper understanding of when you should take a risk and when you shouldn't, and what it means, in fact, to take a risk. And I think rather than just uniformly saying, oh, no, we should be conservative, we shouldn't do this or that, I think the point is that people who understood chess understood what risk was like. And he gives a very significant example. So he says the people who, you know, the standard thing when you're a novice chess player, you bring your queen out. I've got this queen. I want to go around attacking everybody. And so you bring your queen out because, hey, maybe I can make a, you know, a scholar's mate or something like that. But then you learn, as he said, that that's actually a very bad idea, because if you're playing against somebody who knows how to play, it'll work against somebody who doesn't know how to play. But once you start playing against somebody who does know how to play, then those sorts of tactics to try to get a quick checkmate, not only will they not work, but they will backfire because they will impede your development and so forth and so on. So you will actually be wasting moves effectively if you're playing against somebody who knows how to play. So looked at in that context, those sorts of activities are risky activities. They're risky because you're betting that the person you're playing against doesn't actually know how to play very well. And it turns out that's not so you learn that it's not just you should have one type of play depending on who it is that you're playing. You should be trying to put yourself in the mind of the opponent and so forth, as any good chess player will tell you. And that gives you a deeper, detailed understanding of true risk. And so I think when I try to parse the results, my sense is it's not so much, hey, I'm less risk averse, so I'm going to go to Vegas, or I'm just going to cross the highway and who knows what's going to happen. It's not that. It's not the carefree to everything. It's understanding the different variables that are changing. It's understanding the ones that are not changing. It's understanding the broader landscape in which we make decisions. And my sense is that that's really the conclusion that he was able to pull away from those children who had been exposed to chess, is that they had a deeper understanding of those decisions around them, which does, of course, resonate with anybody who has been exposed to chess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And kind of extending this education aspect of the discussion, jumping back to your book, you talk about a concept called far transfer. In fact, you spend 3 chapters extending the discussion about far transfer. And this was a brand new concept to me, and it was fascinating. Could you please explain what far transfer is and how you connect it to learning chess?
Well, it's not this is something that's been in the educational world for a long time. Certainly not only is it not my phrase, I don't pretend to be terribly knowledgeable or familiar with it, but it's one of these things that people talk about for a long time, and not just including chess, but the idea is what skills or activities might have implications that go beyond their particular domain. So if I learn if I learn basic arithmetic, well, that's great. If I want to do some basic calculation, which nobody, of course, has to do anymore these days, but will it have any implications towards my reasoning power or these critical thinking, all the rest of these sorts of things? Will it have any applications to other things? If I'm better at sports, will it give me the confidence or the ability to learn how to do other things or parse them or break them apart? So this is a very established concept in educational circles, so far as I understand. The idea that there are some skills that are worth spending time on to try to inculcate in students, because not only is the thing itself perhaps worth doing, but it has all sorts of implications on a much, much broader level. And presumably that's a bit of the holy grail of why we go to school in the first place, right? So that we can, when it's not just that we're learning little tidbits here and there, it's that so we are learning how to learn, and we are learning how to apply these transferable skills. So and so then it comes down to, well, a lot of people have claimed that chess has this far transfer aspect of it as well. Many of the advocates for chess in schools say it's not just chess per se, because, well, that's just a game and so forth. But the great benefit of playing chess is that if you become an adept chess player, you learn X and Y, which transcend the game itself. And so the question is, to what extent is that true? What's plausible? What's not so plausible? And I try to, and then I play around a little bit with the idea of far transfer, and I have a little, a little sort of play on words with the idea of not only far transferring in terms of outside of the specific domain. So the basic idea is, okay, you learn mathematics, but then you're able to apply it to the fundamental concepts or learning or critical thinking or what have you to, your career if you decide to become an investment banker or a movie star or whatever it is, because those critical thinking ideas have been inculcated in you. So there's that far transfer away from the particular domain. And then I'm talking on a sort of societal level that there are these things that not only are far in terms of their domain, but they may even be far sort of geographically and far outside of what we would even consider the learning process to be. So that's what I do in the book. So first I look at the sort of standard far transfer within education and give my own views as to what is meritorious and what is not so meritorious, perhaps about chess in the educational sphere. Based upon my researches and my exposure to people who are doing these sorts of things. Then I look at a broader aspect of that beyond education, and I look in terms of the social milieu and the social realm, where I think chess is just remarkable power and very, very, very often underappreciated in terms of its impact on prisons, its impact on social and personal empowerment, on economic inequality. I think it has just enormous power, which is very, very underappreciated in my judgment. One of the things I talk about with the prisons is it's not only remarkable in its ability to expose prisoners to ideas and concepts that they might not have otherwise, in fact, in many cases, they will not have otherwise encountered in their lives. But it also has the power to make us as a society ask questions about what we're doing right and wrong in terms of our approaches to incarceration. And I think that too is very salutary and very much worth paying attention to. And then for the end, there's this. I looked at the lessons from AlphaZero, which, as of course you know, AlphaZero is a remarkable accomplishment that represents in many ways the present, at least, culmination of this long tradition of chess influencing artificial intelligence. Not just chess, of course. There was AlphaGo and so forth before that, but chess played a highly salient role in the development of AI. And I look to some of the possibilities of what AI is doing in terms of our ability to learn that are, I think, really transformative. So that too is a legacy of chess and a legacy in the past. So that was the idea of looking at what chess has done in terms of its cultural impact, whether you like the game, whether you hate the game, whether you think it's really interesting, whether it's worth spending time on, whether it's something you want to become a professional at, whether you don't care. You cannot deny, in my judgment, the remarkable power that it has and in the social sphere at all sorts of different levels, and these are definitely worth exploring.
Where do you think that power ultimately comes from? Is it an amalgam of the play aspect that I'm going to ask some more questions about, the absolute zero-sum game aspect of it, or does it go back to the study we just discussed about risk averse?
Well, I mean, the short answer, I always leave it the short answer because it's easy. So the short answer is I don't know. You asked me a question, so I'll speculate because, I have an academic background, so I'll speculate about anything. I'll never hesitate to speculate. I think it's more than, and this is what I talk about a little bit in the films. When you ask yourself what makes chess unique, I think you can't just go for the low-hanging fruit or the easy answer of, it's a zero-sum game, or it's an interesting game, or it has a long history, or it's got its roots in military. It develops as a military representation of military conflict or what have you. All of these things are true. A lot of the things that people say about chess are not true, but there's a mixture of true and not true. But if you look at these things a little bit more thoughtfully, you'll recognize that, well, there are lots of games like that. There are lots of pure strategy games. There are lots of games the game of Go is a great example, right? That's a game, and I contrast Go and chess at some point. Go also came from military strategy. Go also is a pure strategy game. Go has enormous complexity. Go has a longer history than chess does. So you can't, and yet it's a different game. It's a very different game. And the cultural impact of Go, partially because it's been primarily an Asian game for a long time, so I can't comment on its cultural influence in Asia because I simply have no idea. But I think it's safe to say that the breadth of its cultural impact has been vastly, vastly less than chess. Chess is just remarkable in what it's been able to do. I think it would be, I may just be speaking out of ignorance, but I find it inconceivable that you can do 4 films about Go and the cultural impact of Go. Whereas I can tell you, it was not difficult to find enough material to do 4 films about the cultural impact of chess. And that's a very strong statement in and of itself. Why? Where? I don't know. Part of it is this sort of virtuous circle thing, is that it's a game which has bewitched so many people in so many different times and places for such a long period of time that very bewitchment, that very history itself gives rise to an incredible status. Itself gives rise to the sense of the fact that part of what makes chess have the social power that it does is that people recognize it as an incredibly impressive accomplishment to be a strong chess player. It doesn't matter whether you're in Nigeria or whether you're in Japan or whether you're in Mumbai or whether you're in New Zealand. It doesn't make any difference. Everybody knows that that's a huge accomplishment to be able to do that. And now with modern technology being the way it is, the bar to entry to that is lower than it's ever been, not just in terms of you can play a game with somebody and you can go online and all the rest of that. That's obviously true. But what's really remarkable is the access to just this plethora of materials and resources to be able to work and get better and better and better and better and understand the concepts. I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, if you look at us old guys, well, I don't know how old you are, but anyway, if you look at me, just what one had to do to get a grasp of basic concepts, there was so much, it was just so much harder to be able to do 30 or 40 years ago than it is now. And I suspect, again, it's not like I'm an expert in this, but I think it's not a coincidence that you're seeing, a lot more 12-year-old grandmasters. I mean, it's not an everyday thing still, unless you happen to live in India, but it's still, you're seeing much, much, much more of that because there are so many resources. So I think it's the status, it's the inherent beauty of the game, but this is repeated and enhanced, and it just keeps getting more and more repeated and enhanced. And you're in this sort of virtuous circle where as time goes on, not only more and more people hear about chess, they understand it, they understand what it means, and they have access to getting better, and they have access to participating in it. And so once you reach that level of internationalism, it could happen in theory in other games and other activities, but chess is so far ahead of the curve, and it's already dominant in that respect. So anyway, that's my, I should have stuck with I don't know, I suppose, but there we are, 15 minutes later.
Yeah, well, for off the top of your head speculation, that was pretty good. So as we start to close things out, I think one reason why I initially thought of Chessays as a companion book with the documentary was because I found an interesting connection between how you end the book and how you begin the doc in part one, with a lengthy discussion of the importance of play. And I'm going to quote from the end of the book. It's not about winning or losing, or chess, or sports, or entertainment, or any of that at all. It's simply about finding ways to improve ourselves. And the sooner we realize that, the better off we'll all be. And that resonated with me because I've always thought the world would get along perfectly fine if chess didn't exist. Might be a little bit harder for me to make my way in the world, but the world, I don't think would take much note if it had never existed. But since it does, it's essentially perfectly harmless fun.
Yeah, and fun's important. And I don't think there's enough of it. So I certainly agree with that.
Okay. And this one's a little bit more edgy, but a footnote that jumped out at me in the book is, again, quoting from your footnote, the sheer extent of the irony-free domain represented by American chess players, one can only conclude, is truly frightening. There's got to be a story behind the inclusion of that footnote. So could you please share?
Sure. So it's interesting. The book is, let's say there's a plethora of footnotes throughout the book. It's a bit of a sort of running joke, the number of footnotes that I put in.
But I should tell for people that get scared away by books with footnotes, these are fun footnotes.
They're not official references. I mean, they serve as sort of an opportunity for me to break down which wall is it? The Parabasis wall, the fifth wall, the fourth wall? I can never remember which wall it is. But anyway, I'm doing that constantly, but it's even more an opportunity to just vent or be playful or give rein to my my musings. So the other thing I guess I should say is that the book's been released quite recently, and we haven't had a lot of reviews, but that footnote, as it happens, out of all the footnotes that are in the book, which I don't know, they number maybe 70 million or something, there are a lot of footnotes. That particular footnote has now been received interest from 2 people, which I think is statistically significant. And where it comes from.
Two other than me, or am I the second?
No, you're the second. There's one other guy who did, I think it was Chess. He did a review of the book, Vegco. I don't remember the name. Anyway, he thought it was interesting. He thought it was funny. So the full extent is, I say that I mentioned that chess players don't do irony very well. And I mentioned that Americans don't do irony very well, which is not exactly an original point. It's been certainly emphasized by many people in England that Americans seem to lack, as a general rule, a sense of appreciation of irony. And since I mentioned that chess players, my conclusion from this is that chess players on the whole are not sensitive to irony, and Americans are well known not to be sensitive to irony. The sheer extent of the realm of the irony-free domain represented by American chess players must be truly staggering, or words to that effect. So that's where that comes from. Okay. That's about all I can say about that.
Okay. So before I show the last clip I want to show, which is from the end of part 4, the last part, and it's from Russ Makovsky, who was the one that brought Tani Adewumi to the world, where he talks about the gift of chess. Let's give everybody the details of where they can get the book Chessays, where they can get the the Ideas Roadshow app, and when this should be available, just in case this show drops before the availability of the documentary.
Great. So Chessays is available, I don't know, pretty well everywhere fine books are sold. I mean, obviously it's available Amazon and all the rest of that. It's available through your bookstore, through bookshop.org and other things. I'm actually not terribly knowledgeable about all these things. It's available. It's not difficult to get, no matter where you are. The films will be available on the Ideas Roadshow app, both iOS and Google Play, Apple and Google Play. And you can download the app. It's a freely available app. There's lots of other wonderful stuff, but I think the chess movies are probably the best, humbly speaking. And they will be available both to rent and purchase through the app, but the app is freely available. So, and the prices, we've made it quite affordable. There are 4 films. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm terrible at doing this kind of promotional advertising stuff, but I'll just ramble on. There are 4 films, and they're available for 1 week rental on the app for $9.99 total. And $19.99 for purchase. So we've priced them in such a way that, given the fact that there are 4 of them, it's quite reasonable. And they will be available on DVD in 3 months or something like that as well.
Okay, to be clear, the $9.99 is per episode. It's not for all 4. Oh, it's for all 4.
It's for all. See how reasonable we are? I mean, this is, you have to be crazy not to do this. So it's $9.99 for all 4 films to rent, and $19.99 for all 4 to purchase. And you go to ideasroadshow.com for details about how to, I mean, you can, there are other places I'm sure, but go to ideasroadshow.com if you want more information, including how to download this stuff.
No, I having watched it all, I say that is a great value. Again, I think each episode is about 40 to 50 minutes. So we're talking about 3.5 hours at least of chess content here. And when you think about the price of the average chess book is well north of $20, you're getting a good deal here. So thank you, Howard. And let me cue up this last clip, which I feel is a very positive way. Russ Makovsky he's appeared on our One Move at a Time podcast before. He's definitely an ambassador for chess, and he's done a good service to the chess world in bringing and developing Tani Adewumi's talents. So here is Russ talking.
And since that day, I do find it frustrating where you say, I can do it again, we can do it again. Chess has this power. Give me one more chance. Give me one more chance to tell another story. Give me one more chance to highlight that impact on another level. There's been so many more kids impacted. There's been so many more stories told. Give me a chance to get that platform again, and I won't waste it this time. I'll talk about the gift of chess. how I see communities all over Africa being transformed by the act of giving a chess set. I see communities in New York being rebuilt around the idea that kids can connect over the game of chess, that chess is our universal language. It's played in every country, every continent, every nook and cranny of this world, and it has tremendous value, tremendous value. Tremendous value. And I will tell that story, and this time around, it won't be about one child. It'll be about every child.
So, Howard, again, with that, thank you so much for appearing on our One Move at a Time show, and congratulations on putting the documentary and the book together, getting them out there. That's and I know this is what you do for a living, but it's no less an achievement.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate being on your show and the time you took. If I can just say one other thing. So yes, absolutely, everybody should buy, rent, maybe buy and rent our stuff. And I am proud of it, and I do think it does provide something unique and valuable. But I also think that since you brought up Russ Makowski, he's I came to know Russ through this project. I think he's a remarkable guy. And I think people should also, in between delving into their wallet to purchase as many Ideas Roadshow things as they can possibly imagine, I think they should also look to the gift of chess, and they should also become aware of what it is that he is doing, because I think that is just, it's really quite remarkable. And so I'd like to give him a plug as well, just because he's one of those people. There are others, Tunde Onakoya from Chess and Slums Africa, Pontus Carlson with Business Meets Chess and Kids. Lots and lots of people are doing remarkable things. And I think in addition to loving the game and appreciating the game and getting enjoyment from the game, as everybody should and as everybody does, it is worth paying attention to the ways that chess is really helping to make the world a better place. And there are some exceptional people who are doing just a fantastic job to do precisely that.
Well, I think that lets me have a little bit of a coda here as well, and say that there are a number of people included in your documentary who are definite friends of U.S. Chess and Chess Life magazine. Bruce Pandolfini, Ken Regan. I also saw, I'm drawing a blank now, but there were Larry Kaufman. So a couple of others. So there's definitely a U.S. chess bent here. Even a cover of Chess Life magazine that I once edited with Ken Regan is picture on there, makes an appearance in the documentary. So thank you for that little ego boost for me. So again, Howard Burton, thank you so much, and good luck with the numbers as people, I'm sure, will start downloading and purchasing the documentary and the book.
Well, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate the time, and it's been wonderful getting to know you. And by the way, of course, you don't need this, but you got a special thanks in the film because through your efforts, you were able to put me in touch with people like Bruce Pandolfini and Larry Kaufman and so forth. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's been really a privilege and a great experience to encounter so many interesting and dynamic people throughout the chess world.
Despite our lack of irony.
Oh, you can't have everything.
Right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.